Good evening. The Tuesday, September 11th, 2018 meeting of the Evanston Preservation Commission is called to order. We have a quorum. The first item of business under old business is the consideration of the approval of the report and resolution asking the city manager to transmit the commission's recommendation to designate 2010 Dewey Avenue as an Evanston landmark. The property owner, Family Focus, has asked to do a brief presentation, and I see Dino Robinson is here. And Dino, if you also would like to do that, that's fine. So would you like to start, or Bridget, do you want to go first? Once, just for the commission's purposes. Oh, yes, please do. For the commission's purposes, once we hear from both of them, we'll talk about the report.
Okay.
And then Dino, if I can ask you to sign in too once you come up.
I should have done that before. I would have known by now.
Yeah.
Well, good evening.
We have to remind everybody all the time.
It's my third time. Good evening. For the record, my name is Bridget O'Keefe. I'm an attorney with Daspin and Allman. I'm here tonight on behalf of Family Focus. I'm accompanied by Mary X, who's the executive director of Family Focus. We appreciate the opportunity to continue the conversation about the proposed landmark designation of the 2010 Dewey Building. Since the July vote, we've come to the realization that there is far less interest in the building, which was placed on the market in late June. We have been informed by Family Focus's broker that any initial interest was there is gone. So we talked to the broker and we worked with the broker to explore, is there a way to work with the commission on the landmark designation to still provide some flexibility in the language that would help make this building still attractive for adaptive reuse. At the hearing in July and during the staff report that was issued on Friday, it's been stated the building is being designated not for its architecture, but it's for its historic and cultural significance to the city of Evanston. So given the recognition by everybody that the building is not architecturally significant, we saw the opportunity to build flexibility into the designation language in an attempt to make the property more attractive to either the community group that may potentially seek to purchase the property or other entities. So as a result, we submitted this proposed landmark designation language for consideration. And I'd like to just kind of briefly walk you through it and explain why we've suggested what we've suggested and the benefits we think it provides. So we agree with the staff that the period of significance is from 1905 till 1979, which is when the school closed. We're proposing that the landmark designation only extend to the exterior of the building and make it clear that it does not include the interior of the building, which allows maximum flexibility to modernize the building for alternate uses. We also state that the landmark designation shall not include the surrounding land located on the lots of record which are associated with the building. The reason we've specifically proposed excluding the vacant land from the landmark designation, which is allowed by the Evanston Code if you specifically exempt it, you are authorized to do so. We believe that there may be portion of that vacant land, particularly that land located immediately to the north of the building, which holds a parking lot, that could be sold for a low-density residential development under the existing R4 zoning. Exempting it from the landmark designation would reassure potential purchasers of the land who might be concerned about potential delays or increased costs of having to obtain a certificate of appropriateness. The community would remain protected because the development would still be subject to the zoning and building codes and the processes that have to go with that. But it would simplify the process by removing a layer of approval. As we've stated previously, the building and the land is the only asset owned by Family Focus. And they have a fiduciary duty to maximize its value. As a result, we believe that this redevelopment or selling of this small parcel of land, which we have not even discussed with anyone, we're coming to you first, may represent the only opportunity Family Focus has to offset some of the lost value of the building posed by the designation. So we're asking the Preservation Commission to limit the landmark designation to the building itself. We then go into the actual building itself, and it is common in historic designations to identify a primary facade or a secondary facade. And we're suggesting that this be done in this case, where the east facade would be the primary facade, and the north, south, and west elevations, because they're secondary and less visible, they have been significantly altered, and they have very minimal architectural design and expression. They be considered secondary elevations. And the language calls out that more significant changes could be made to those secondary elevations that are reasonable to meet new needs. We also would provide that new additions could be allowed on the roof or a secondary elevation of the building, so long as such additions, and this is to provide protection, are designed to be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features of the building, and to distinguish them from the original structure. These are standard preservation protections that are often built into designations. We want to do that because we feel that sensitive additions should be allowed to the secondary facades and the roof. We're particularly concerned about the staff report's designation of the following critical features: the flat roof, the stone lintels on the west facade, and the stone bands on the north facade. All of these would be deemed secondary facades. All of these features, putting this language in, would deter future additions which may potentially be needed to make the building viable. That's why we think it's important to call out that additions would be considered as something that, could go through the process and would be given the flexibility to provide. We think it provides future users with some assurance that additions would be allowed as long as they meet the traditional standards governing rehabilitation of historic buildings, and understand that such review would be subject to the certificate of appropriateness. We also then provide language that provides flexibility with regards to windows. We feel that's needed because there's many different kinds of windows on the building that were put in over a variety of times, and the staff report, and then I want to go into a little more of the language of the staff report right now. So this is language that's contained in the staff report, which I understand and I know, and I really appreciate the fact it was designed to help provide this understanding that there was going to be flexibility on the architecture of the building, and that it wasn't being landmarked for its architectural significance, but rather, for its historic and cultural significance. But this language is very, very broad. And and it's very generic, and it doesn't provide any specific clarity to someone who might come in and want to purchase the building. For example, if you read this language, if you were thinking about buying the building and putting on an addition, do you think if you read this, would you think you had the right to do that? It's not as clear as the language we're suggesting. If you're thinking about work being done, proposed as compatible with the building as it had evolved up to 1979, it would not be expected to go back and build a replica of the 1905 building or the like. We're not sure what that means, because the building evolved significantly between 1905 and 1979. What direction does this provide to a future owner seeking to make improvements or to add on to the building? The report states that one must discount the appearance of windows from the 1990s and be more in keeping with the windows that were there in the 1979. But there were windows from every era in the building, every era that the building's been there. They were all there in 1979. So this just doesn't provide the level of clarification that we think is needed to provide comfort to a potential purchaser that improvements will be allowed to modernize the building and make it functional in today's economic environment. So we're asking for the Commission to acknowledge the important services that Family Focus has provided to Evanston for decades and the significant financial investment it has made. We believe the decision before you tonight is very important, because the language chosen will determine if the building can be successfully marketed or if we're creating a white elephant that may ultimately be closed and become a blight on the community. Family Focus is asking you to approve this language and work with us to provide the needed flexibility to provide more certainty for future owners. We believe this would benefit not only a potential private purchaser, but also the Foster Center One Place Group, which is a community-based organization which is seeking to identify funding to purchase the building. We believe it benefits everyone if the language is drafted as expansively as possible, because in the end, we all share the same goal, which is to save the building, because no one benefits from the building not being sold for productive reuse. So those are our thoughts on the proposed staff report.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question? I mean, I generally remember what the building looks like, but do you have any pictures of, I mean, you're distinguishing the east facades from the others, and I don't know.
The east facade was the main facade where
Right.
that tall, I didn't bring any pictures, and I'm so sorry, but it's where the tall new addition was added in like 2002, and to the north was the 1905, 1926 building, and to the south was the more modern building from 1961. So it's the primary facade.
I mean, did you select, I mean, is that the only facade that is historic?
Well, you know, we don't believe that the building has historic integrity. So we chose the entrance, the primary entrance to the building, and the one that focuses on the park and on the community center across as being the most visible. And there's no, and chose to look at the west and the north facades where there's parking lots, or on the south facade where there's kind of a child care new additions from 61 as being the secondary facades.
Okay, then also in terms of future developable land, would it be possible, I mean, is it just the parking lot you're interested in versus like, I mean, the language you wrote would cover any land, anywhere, and you know, obviously if you put something right in front of the east facade, that wouldn't be.
Well, remember the east facade, the land there is very narrow.
Right.
And the east facade's a primary facade. So it's really, the land that's really from is, you have to look at the zoning code and what kind of lot dimensions do you have to be able to create and subdivide a lot. That lends itself mostly to the north parking lot, because that's of a rectangle of a sufficient size that you could actually get the setbacks, the minimum lot area, et cetera. I did not look at the west, but I don't believe the east is got enough land or is of a configuration where it could happen.
Okay. I think I have a few questions for you afterwards, but I'm going to ask Dino if you'd step up and address your issues or observations.
Okay, stating for the record, my name is Dino Robinson. I represent the surrounding community and the author of the proposal to designate the 2010 Dewey property as a historic landmark. In all, from what the previous what Family Focus representatives had presented today, really falls in line with the same spirit of what we were trying to address with designating this as a landmark for its history. I do want to see or assure that any bodies that want to invest in that building have that flexibility to do things they need to make it viable, especially on the interior, to have that flexibility to tear down walls, reconfigure floor plans, whatever is needed to make it more viable. For the outside, if there's any additions put to it, as long as it falls and fills within the criteria of said zoning and building criteria, as long as it fits within that, we should be fine. I just want to prevent like a A-frame structure tagged onto with aluminum siding. I mean, that's not going to work very well. But from what was proposed by Family Focus, it falls in line with the spirit that we have. We did have a short conversation before this meeting about the lot north to the lot north of the building, which is perfectly fine with the feeling of the proposal. I don't think the community is going to push back on that at all for appropriate development. The east side, I think, is the front-facing building that people are familiar with. I don't see any development happening on there, but as that's the primary space as you're talking about. So I think what the Family Focus is trying to do to make this building as viable as possible and clear as possible for any potential investor to know that they have flexibilities while maintaining the integrity of the building. So that's pretty much my comment.
Great. Thank you, Dino. Any other folks have any other points of clarification? I had a couple of questions, and I guess concerns, too. I think that my major concern with the proposed landmark designation language is really about whether or not we're creating an exception to the ordinance provisions, and whether or not the way that I observe the property is that essentially the site itself and the building are part and parcel of the designation. And from my perspective, I frankly think that the commission should have the opportunity to review that, whether it's through a subdivision proposal, whether it's through some other mechanism. I simply don't believe the review that we would give would necessarily be onerous on anyone who's coming through any of the other city processes.
But a subdivision ordinance, if you meet certain requirements, there's not a lot of discretion in it. And there's underlying zoning protections that go with density, height, setbacks, et cetera. I think what I'm trying to ask for here is a recognition that this is not a private developer. This is a nonprofit. This nonprofit, if they cannot make that land valuable or that building viable, then it's going to end up a white elephant, which no one wants. Mm-hmm. If the people who are proposing to designate the building as a landmark are okay with if you want to limit the land and make sure that it doesn't include or apply to the east facade, and that land on the, that fronts on the building on the east side, that wouldn't affect the viability. But if we could put together a sensitive development as of right that meets zoning and subdivision code, then this does add an extra process. It does add time. It does add uncertainty. It does add cost. And I am a preservationist at heart. Yeah. I really am. But that north parcel particularly, it's not going to affect the building because anything will have to be set back from it. And it creates, and this is a unique case because of the nonprofit nature of the user and the fact that the building, most buildings in Evanston are landmarks because of their architecture. This is one of the few buildings that's not a landmark because of its architecture. So thus, that visibility question isn't as important as long as you're still maintaining the character of the building. And you're largely maintaining the character of the primary building, primary facade that everyone sees and equates with Foster School, which is really the east facade, because that is everything else is backs on an alley or is parking. It's not got the presence of the east facade, which is where the park is. So we would ask for flexibility and understanding that this is a unique situation. But that this does have a significant impact on the financial ability of Family Focus to, if they can recoup some of their losses on the land, then that may make it more affordable on the building for someone to save the building. I mean, it's all give and take.
One quick question. I don't know who has control of the slide. Can we go back to the proposed language?
Yeah.
In terms of the north lot, if we were going to exclude that, do you know the exact dimensions of, I think we'd have to be very explicit about it's the lot of record excluding the north 50 feet or whatever that precise dimension.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, I'd also want to look at, and I'm being really honest, I would want to look at the west or this. I want to look at the west or even potentially the south. I haven't looked at it from the standpoint of looking at a zoning review of either, because really it's the north that is the easiest to do.
The most obvious.
It is the most obvious. But the most obvious presence that you want to maintain is the east. That's the
How
most.
many lots of record are there?
I believe there's just one lot of record, I think, but I can't swear to it. I don't know that I've seen a survey.
I mean, I don't know if we're ready to talk about changes to the language that might make it more acceptable to us, so you want to defer that discussion.
Yeah, I guess the question that we have is did you hear from, the question that we have is about whether or not we can take extra time to do this because of the amount of time, before we have to submit it to council, and to really kind of work through these issues, because I'm not sure we're actually going to solve them tonight.
I mean, I read these really carefully before coming, and I think I think we would have to write these differently to make, I think the ideas are fine, but for example, this one would allow you to build something right in front of the east facade. I mean, we could write, the only developable land, looking at the aerial, is the north parking lot. I mean, the rest, there's no land. So, for example, we could say that we're only allowed to include recommendations for future development, but we could say that
For future review, you're talking about.
yeah, so we could figure that out, but we could only say that it wouldn't prevent a subdivision and separate use of that northern parcel. For example, the language that's in here is broad enough to cover an actual, not separate use, but an actual addition to the building, as opposed to a sale and a subdivision. So, but I think throughout here.
But in addition to the building would have to go through a certificate of appropriateness, because the building itself would be a landmark, and so anything that touches the building is going to have to go through your process.
Yeah,
It's only the land.
What your words say. You say
Yeah.
any use of the
No, it
vacant
does.
land.
It does. It says
Well,
second.
and I think the other thing is if we're talking about that, if it's one lot of record, if that's subdivided, it's going to have to come here anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
Why?
We can write in
Because we do review subdivisions of lots of records specific to landmarks.
But I think your code gives you the ability to specifically exempt out, and no, it does, vacant land from the designation of a landmark. And so thus the landmark, and we can define vacant land as we choose to. You could say vacant land to the north. But if the vacant land is not part of the landmark, I would suggest you may not need to come back.
It would certainly get flagged in the city's process as a landmark, but then maybe it would just stay at a staff level if it's already on record that the north 50 feet of the parcel is excluded and someone's subdividing 49 and a half feet in that zone. It maybe wouldn't need to come to the commission. I don't know how
Yeah.
that would play out.
Yeah.
I think it's like 7, I think for some reason in my head it's like
Yeah,
63 feet,
I don't
or 70
remember
feet.
what
It would need to be very precise.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
could have
it
that.
has to be.
We could have that. I mean, I could provide that.
I get.
Is there a way we could,
Yeah.
we can't do it sitting here. Is there a way we can draft different language to achieve the same things
Well,
in
that's
a narrower way?
that's a question I have for Scott in terms of deadlines. When do we need to? Because we have to. The reality is we have to meet the 70-day requirement to get the recommendation to the city council. And my understanding is we can't reopen the public hearing, and so we've kind of got to figure out how we're going to approach this. Is it something that we spend some extra time on this language and maybe do this as an approval? Among the commission and post it publicly? How can we handle that, Scott? Where we potentially do it electronically and it gets posted, is there a way that, how can we do that?
Yes, Chair Williams, thank you for pointing out the language in the ordinance about the 70 days from close of public hearing, that the commission should make that recommendation. So since July 10th is when the public hearing was closed, we're running up towards that 70 days there. So I would recommend that if the language in the staff report is recommended to be amended, particularly regarding that point 4 with the design guidelines, that we should be as specific as possible this evening with that recommendation. And obviously we don't have a survey in front of us, nor does the owner, but there may be language that could be
Would it be,
directing.
I mean, is it possible that we could agree that tonight that that there will be language covering these points, but that the specific drafting will happen over the next few days and then be approved by each
You mean
party?
covering these points so that they specifically meet zoning or whatever codes are appropriate? Is that what you're talking about, Mark?
Well, can I ask a question? Is a specific issue of concern just the vacant land?
No, I mean, I think the drafting of all the language is not necessarily what we want to agree to.
Yeah.
So we've got one more week, I guess. If permissible, my thought would be that we, we agree generally that something like, to this effect will be included. And then over the next week, which I think is the deadline, we get in place language that we write after this that then both parties get to see and comment on. They'll be generally to this effect, but might be more precise. I mean, for example, the interior of the building isn't even subject to our
we wouldn't
review. I mean, it's just
review
not
that.
technically correct.
Yeah.
But see, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take the language that's in the staff report and make it very clear for a potential purchaser, if they're coming in and looking at this report, what they can and where they've got the flexibility. And I know what you're saying about the interior not, but if you put this here, then someone looks at it and says, okay, I know I can do, clearly I know what I can do, what I want on the inside.
Well,
and I'm trying to make this building, this marketable.
I understand that, but at the same time, they should, knowing that it's a landmark, they should be looking at the ordinance as well. And that's going to tell them that unless the interior is designated, there's really no issue there.
But you have in your report, you have design guidelines in number 4. Even if you put in language that said something to the effect, maybe not put this in, but in the design guidelines saying as known by the landmark ordinance of Evanston, this does not apply to the interior. That way then you can, reaffirm that that's what the code provides, but it does say it for the layman looking at it. Just a thought. I'm just throwing it out
Do
there.
we have flexibility to do the drafting after this?
That's a Scott question.
Right, I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you guys.
Again, I would suggest that we have language or direction that may not have to be precise language, but should be clear direction about the design guidelines that are asked to be implemented. So if the commission were looking to exclude review of that area between the north facade of the building and the north property line, even though we might not have the precise dimension right now, I think something to that effect would be enough.
So I just have, can I just ask a question? I don't really, I don't know how I would be able to evaluate anything without any kind of, looking at zoning and possible subdivisions and how close it could be to the existing building and what that means. So that I'm just uncomfortable with, the language of the last item, because I don't really know what that means.
Well,
unless we actually see some.
See, we don't
zoning
know what the use is going to be, but we do know that R4 zoning allows single-family homes and townhomes, right? And we know that there's setback requirements in the rear. We know that the northern portion of the building has limited visibility as compared to the southern portion of the building, which is visible to the street, as is the east portion of the building, which is visible to the street. So so there will be a process that goes through this, and it's just that we're trying to allow, if something can be done as of right, and the people who are proposing the designation understand that they also want to keep the building viable.
Right.
We're asking for some flexibility here. There's no option to get any value out of this building. Right now, we're in a really difficult situation. We have no one interested in the building except for one nonprofit that's gone silent. And then the community group who has yet to been able to identify the financial viability. So that's why this parcel, small as it is, does have some value.
I mean, I guess personally, I'm open to splitting off some, basically having you, the owner, propose basically almost a subdivision and just say, okay, to meet the zoning setback on the north for the existing building, the property line would have to be here, so therefore that would exclude however many feet it is of the north part of the parcel. But we'd have to be very
Specific.
We have to be
Yeah,
very
'cause
specific about
otherwise
what that
it's-
is. and
That's what I'm.
Well, I could probably figure that out, and then I can't do it tonight. But the thing is, can I clarify something? So, depending on your use, you might have a different setback. So I would,
No, my point is, you'd know for the existing building what the setback would be.
Yeah, what the
For existing
required
building,
setback
for
for
instance.
what the R4
Existing.
setback would be.
Yes.
Okay, we can look
Yeah.
at that.
Right,
I
and
don't
then
know.
that sets the north line of
Yeah.
the parcel for the existing building, so to speak, and then whatever's left over becomes what we exclude. I mean, I think at the north it's obvious. The rest of it's too complex to probably do that in advance.
Scott, did you have something to add?
Yes, Commissioners, in the hypotheticals, as you're noting, it does get a little more complex. Even the setback of the existing structure would depend whether it's a residential structure or non-residential structure. So the potential future use were to be residential, would be a 5-foot side yard setback, where if it to be non-residential, it'd be a 15-foot side yard setback. There are minimum lot widths in the R4 district. Those differed for single-family and two-family versus townhomes, single-family attached, or other uses. So
So I mean, I guess my point is just that we're trying to do something to help make it more marketable, and so we're sort of taking a worst case scenario. So it'd be go 15 feet off the north wall, draw a line, and say that's the limit of landmark review. Not that some other situation couldn't happen. It's just giving them the flexibility to make it marketable, not
Yeah.
that the
See, I always
typical-
thought that the
And how
parcel's
would-
going to be developed east to west.
Yeah, we don't.
Because
The thing is, we
because
don't know.
the width
until
isn't
someone-
here. The width isn't.
Yeah, and
the width
that's-
isn't here.
And that's what
The
makes...
width is here.
Right, and that's what makes it very challenging when we're talking about this, because I think, we don't know, I understand your issue when it comes to marketability, but the issue is when there is something concrete that's out there, if it's not the same kind of animal, it's really hard to think about what that might be and kind of wrap your head around that. And so that's kind of the fundamental issue that I have. I have some precedent concerns about doing this, but I understand from your perspective, and I appreciate the fact that you've come to talk about this, and that the neighborhood and Dino's group is really on board with this. So I think what we want to do is come up with something that we can live with, that we feel meets the ordinance spirit and the standards, and go from there. So I don't know if someone has a suggestion in terms of potential motion language, or...
My thought is to follow really on what you said, Diane, the ordinance, I don't have the exact language in front of me, what the ordinance allows us to do is make recommendations
Right.
for future designs. It doesn't allow us to actually approve anything now.
It's true.
And I realize, rather than trying to be creative about it, which I'm not, my fear is once we also try to say something like at least 15 feet, then it could be it's equally possible that could hurt you as that could help
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So my thought is to keep it simple, particularly since we have to get it done, and just simply take the language, the sentence that was already written for the commission report that's I think on the prior page about not discouraging future, just simply to modify this language so that for the first paragraph, just to add something about, about without limitation, something about the types of approvals that might be granted, which would include, changing the windows, potential development, potential subdivision and development of the north parking lot, and then, something about the roof and about other elevations. So we would still have to approve, but it would specifically tell somebody that those are things that the commission knew it might be approving in the future.
And I just want to say something, I don't know, there's really nothing, I think, the east facade is also a mix of stuff, and what if somebody wanted to do like a really great addition beyond that entry so that they made a courtyard and it was off of the east facade? That would be, that's something that we may end up looking at that might be successful, and that wouldn't mean that you would, I wouldn't rule I wouldn't limit, you're limiting things before those possibilities exist as well with the language.
Well, not really, because if you think it's really great, we have to go through the certificate. First of all, there's not enough land on the east side to do anything much. Number two, we have to go through the certificate of appropriateness. A lot of that land is not owned by us on the east side. And then on the second thing is we have to go through a certificate of appropriateness for anything to the building. So if you're going to add to the east, west, south, or north facade, we would have to come back to you and go through your process.
Right.
And then the standards, the typical standards that you utilize would meet. But what you would be saying by putting in some version of some of this is that we're going to give you a little more latitude here and not as much like on the north, south, and west, and not as much latitude on the east. We're going to say that a rooftop addition, sensitive rooftop addition, is something that we contemplate and could feel comfortable with. This kind of specificity is what helps us. If you leave it too generic, it's just not helpful. It really doesn't achieve what we need to achieve to make the building viable from a marketing perspective.
I guess I'm uncomfortable with some of the specificity, so maybe it's what Mark's saying, that there's...
I feel like Mark's suggestion's better,
I
because
do
the more
too,
specific we get,
It's-
it might feel like, yes, we're opening this door, but we're
But you're
closing
clo-
these other doors. And we
Yeah.
don't, until someone has a project in mind, it's hard to know what the ramifications of it are, other than saying, we review lots of additions, we review lots of subdivisions.
I'm
we
just
review
going
lots
by
of
what the broker
renovations.
told me. The broker told me that this kind of language would help her market the building. She signed off on this. She said that in her market world, she needs to be able to go to a potential purchaser and say, hey, you have some flexibility with regards to what you can do to the building, additions, window changing, things like that. Now,
But why couldn't she just say that? Because it's all part of, it is true. That's what we said. It's like to put it in, just, a broker, if they really understood the language in the ordinance, that's what happens, It's like, it seems to me the more general it is, and I understand you're looking for specificity, but why do we have to put that in the language?
I represent a lot of developers that develop historic rehab. I've seen them. They take what they call the language which governs the significance of the landmark building, which is what basically this is, and they want to see it, they want to review it, and they want to know where their limits are and where their opportunities are. And the language, if it's too generic that it doesn't say anything, and then for example, if you looked at the language as drafted right now and you'd see a critical feature as a flat roof, that would say to a developer, you cannot put an addition on a flat roof because that impairs the critical feature of the building. If you look at the west facade and it says the lintels over the windows, that says to a developer, you can't put an addition up that's going to cover up the lintels. Or on the north facade, that's going to cover up the banding. They're going to read those critical features, which are very specific, and they're going to say, unless somewhere it says it's okay to do an addition despite these critical features, that provides that offset.
Yeah, I think we don't even have the power to approve any kind of addition today. So I think to the extent it would help you, for us to say, to identify certain things that may be acceptable, and so there would be words, so there'd be words in the report that you could then point people to and say, look, they knew right here that you might replace the windows. They knew right here that you might put things on the roof. It's in here. I mean, it's not going to be binding on us either way. And so I think we can I think we can use a lot of your words so that you would have something to point to rather than being just completely generic. But it's still going to have to go through a commission process no matter what we say. I mean, it's not an alternative to have something of right.
Well, the only thing I'm seeking as of right, only thing, is that north parcel. Other than that, I never considered that we would bypass the process. I always assumed we'd have to go through the process.
Well, here's the question for you. I don't think we're going to approve that you could build a building, that we're not going to approve today, at least, pre-approve, that you could build another building that touched this one.
No, well, no.
So then the
Touched, you
question
mean
is
an
what-
addition or like a separately subdivided lot? Because we never would say an addition.
Whichever. I mean, or 1 foot or 2 feet or another lot and no setback. So if you want to propose something specific for us to consider, we could consider it, just covering that. But you can see the problem is your language would literally mean you could have a building that abuts this.
No, we couldn't because it has to comply with code. See, you can't approve anything that does not comply with the zoning or the building code. So whatever setback is required, be it non-residential or residential, whatever lot size is required, that all, we still have to comply with that. That's the protection that comes to the village,
It
the
has
city.
to come before us. Any zoning,
If
zoning
there's-
variances to build up to lot lines of zoning there are within our jurisdiction
yes.
in the landmark district. So it all has to come
This
before
isn't a
us.
landmark district.
Yeah, if it's an individual designation, it has to come to.
Okay, I think I'm going to respectfully disagree because the language in the code allows you to exempt out the vacant land. It specifically says the landmark will include the site and the building unless you would specifically exempt out the vacant land. So you
have
could
the
do that.
Do you have the citation?
It's in the definition of the word landmark in your historic preservation ordinance. There's a definition of landmark, and it specifically calls that out. I can get it on my phone.
No, I've got it. I've
Okay.
got it here. You've got it up there.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Just to clarify, and thank you for bringing that up, Ms. O'Keefe, the local landmark local landmark definition is a building, structure, site, or object designated as a landmark by the council that has a high degree of historic, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance to the city of Evanston. For the purposes of this chapter, and unless otherwise expressly provided by council in the ordinance for designation, all designation shall presumptively include the lots of record associated with the structure or object designated as landmark.
So that would give the council the right to exempt out a portion of that. And I assumed that could be included in your staff report, or your report that you make to the city council. If this is something better deferred to city council, that also is a possibility. But I interpreted that language as giving you that freedom.
I mean, the proposed language is a certificate of appropriateness shall not be required for new construction on the vacant land located on the lot. So that would literally be up to the building in any location. I would personally not be in favor of adopting that.
We could limit it.
It should say something, it shouldn't say that, it should say something like a subdivision of the lot of record would not, or that the limit of the landmark stops short of the property line, so therefore when they would apply for a subdivision, if they're outside that landmark boundary, it
Well,
wouldn't be-
essentially,
we'd be approving a subdivision tonight, basically.
yeah,
effect.
that's the issue.
Yeah,
No, you can't do that because it can only be done by council. So all this is just
a
a recommendation to council.
But we
Right.
can't.
Part of the report includes number 5 in the report's a map showing the location of the nominated landmark. So I'd suggest if the commission wanted to make that change, it would be directing staff to make a change to that map, that exhibit that shows the location of the nominated landmark. Right now, it highlights the entire parcel there. So if that change were to be made and the northern part of the parcel, if the commission does not believe that should be part of the landmark, then I believe that map should be changed to show the areas of the lot that would be part of the landmark.
I mean, we could look at the dimensions of the lot a little more carefully and get back to you in the next couple days with, because there are limits on lot size and setbacks that really limit where you can put that line. And we could get back to you on that if that's something that you'd be willing to consider.
Yeah, I mean, in effect, it's kind of preemptively saying what a reasonable subdivision of the lot would be. And so it kind of, without that technical information, it's hard to approve that in a vague way.
Well, it's saying that it's really what we're trying to say is that we don't believe that the north lot really is essential to what makes the building a landmark. And that it is something, because it's a passive land, vacant with which could be separated easily from the building without adversely affecting the historic aspect of the building. It's saying that we understand that flexibility should be given to make sure that this building remains viable. Because it's what makes that building a landmark is not that land. It really isn't. And so what you're just saying in your staff report is we recognize that land isn't what makes this building a landmark as an historic or cultural, criteria. So it's not so much a subdivision, because ultimately council makes the decision if land should be subdivided or not. It's not something that's within your jurisdiction. You're just saying that this land really isn't what lends to the historic character of the building. So that when we go back for subdivision, then we can say, it was recognized at the time that this wasn't important or essential to the preserving the historic aspect of the building. That's what, in my opinion, it does.
Thoughts?
I don't want to keep
What?
repeating it.
Jamie and Susie, do you have any thoughts? Scott, do you have any ideas as the zoning person, expert?
Sure. So on the question of the potential subdivision redevelopment of that north parcel, it's tough to exactly speculate, but it looks like there's around 80 feet or so between the where the lot line jogs and goes out into what was previously Dewey Avenue, has now been vacated. You can do a 35-foot wide lot to put a single-family home there. However, you need a wider lot if you're going to do multifamily, and then the number of units there depend on the lot size. So all that would have to be determined at the time. I think it comes down to whether the commission would like to see any proposal for the future of that northern portion of the lot, or not. The subdivision process, you all have seen a subdivision recently, about a year and a half ago or so. Subdivision process is relatively straightforward, does not go to Plan Commission, only goes to the City Council. So it would go to the Commission for a recommendation, then it would go to Planning and Development Committee for a resolution to approve the subdivision. It's not a very time-intensive process as far as our zoning processes, and certainly a lot quicker than the plan development process that may be involved, depending on potential future developments of the lot. So it would, potentially add a month or so in the process, depending on when we received an application for it. So I guess those are factors for the commission to consider when considering whether you would want to review that northern portion of the lot to include it in the landmark.
Well, I think there are maybe a couple choices of what we could do. One would be to simply draw the line to exclude the northern lot, which I think I'd be against, because it would be nothing to do with the subdivision. You could literally just build an addition in that location, so I'd be against that. The other would be to say that I mean, we don't have any power to pre-approve a subdivision. It still has to
No.
come back, but we could certainly say that the future development that would not be objectionable would be a subdivision of the northern lot. It would still have to come here for approval, I'm sure, but it would be part of the pre-recommendation
Yeah,
of something that would be looked favorably on.
Yeah,
Yeah, just information, the subdivision does come here first. It has to come here first, so we can't circumvent that process.
yeah, which is what Scott was just referring to, because, I mean, in my mind, that's something I think that makes sense, just referring to the subdivision thing, and that would be looked favorably on.
I defer to what your decision is. We need flexibility.
Yeah.
We
I
need
mean,
flexibility.
If you're looking, in the issue that I have is, I think if we're talking about any sort of market certainty, I think the idea that a potential development or a subdivision of this, in order to achieve a development objective, would be, if we're giving an indication that it would be reviewed positively, I think that's pretty much all we can do at this point, frankly. But I also think that would provide a certain level of market certainty. So,
It's better than, it's not as far as we'd like to see it, but it's better than not having anything. I'm not trying to be ungrateful. I appreciate your willingness to look at that. But can we also talk about language regarding additions and language regarding roofs and windows, and adding some more of that general language in the staff report under the design guidelines in a similar flavor to help provide a little comfort?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark said that earlier, is that
right.
the right answer is just to take kind of the points you've raised that are apparently of concern in the real estate market, and just reiterate that the commission reviews these kinds of things, and that these types of projects would be favorably considered. But the specifics of it, they still have to come for review, but
Well, they always
At
have to
least the
come
door
for
is open.
review.
sorry.
What do you think about the concept of primary versus secondary facades? Because that is common in landmark designations, to identify a primary facade and a secondary facade,
I guess-
with more deference being given.
See, the way, and correct me if I'm wrong, right now, in terms of our ordinance, what we're looking at is things that are visible from the public way. And so I'm not sure we can necessarily, especially with a building like this that's pretty open and out there, I'm not sure that we can get away from the public way description on that. I think that in terms of because it is being designated for historic and cultural reasons, in my mind, that's something that, how we look at that because of that is going to be different fundamentally because of the architectural
And I just want to say again, I don't think that you want to limit yourself to saying that the primary facade you want to keep, because, I mean, it's really long, and there's a lot of stuff that could be done to it that someone might want to do.
Well, we're
And-
not saying you have to keep it. We still have to go through the process, and if we want to change the primary
But
facade,
you don't have to. What I'm saying is, why list what the primary facades are? And it's everything. Basically, a landmark building is all the facades. So if you list one, it's like somehow that might send a message to a developer or a builder, I'm not going to touch that facade, I'm just going to change the windows. And we're not even being that specific about that. So it seems to, I'm just saying some of the language you're trying to open it up, but it might actually close down some possibilities when someone's really looking at it.
I'm just going with what the broker told me. But the other way to look at it is maybe we amend the critical features, and we don't put down a flat roof, we don't put down the stone lintels, we don't put down the banding as critical features, because that will make it easier if that discussion comes through. And that's something that's within your ability to do when you amend the report.
Which page are you referring to on that, Bridget?
So that would page 13 of 18 in the report.
Yeah, 13.
Number 3 is identification of the critical features.
I just wanted to confirm that.
Right. So I'm approaching it from a different perspective, but you do have specificity in some places and not in others, and that could also cause problems going forward. That's where I like your general language. You see, I like your general language with regards to something like, for example, when we suggested language that's something like additions have to be designed with the massing scale, size, and architectural features of the building. That is, and that distinguish themselves from the original structure. That is fairly common standard language in a preservation ordinance. It's fairly generic. It says, yes, we're going to, want this to be compatible with what's there while looking different, but it doesn't have those list of critical features that we then don't run into.
Well, I have a question, so for the commissioners. Do you feel, there's a horizontality to the building. Do we need to specify them? If we said the commission in the future would look favorably on a broader interpretation of design standards, do we have to list? That's a question. Do we need to list these things?
I think, in my mind, that's a good point. I don't necessarily think that we have to.
Because if we didn't, it would mean that it's a broader interpretation and you're not pointing out, we've got some aluminum windows, if somebody was building on top, I don't know how, I would not be opposed since we have that statement, the broader interpretation, modification of the building, how do people feel listing these elements?
Ladies?
I would agree with Julie that I don't think it has to be that specific on which elements are
Okay.
critical.
Mark and Ken?
I just have a question. Let's say someone said, okay, like nothing was listed. I'm just going to stucco over the whole building. Let's just pose these things. I'm just going to do that. It's all going to be cohesive, and I'm developing this, and it's all stucco, and is that, that would be not listing anything. That's somebody could, come before us and say that. And then I guess and then this is like another weird question, but then is it so different? This isn't, maybe this is a question for the why we're landmarking. It becomes so different. Is the meaning still there? That's just a question.
Well, I think you need to have some language in there. I do, because I do think you don't want somebody to come in if the building's red brick, and it's always been red brick for the last since 1905, and people have a recognition of a red brick building. You wouldn't want to stucco that over. That wouldn't be appropriate. But if you put in language like, if you look at the fourth paragraph, where it says designed to be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features, or you could put design of the building and distinguishes themselves from the original structure. That's fairly standard language. It gives you something generic that would prevent somebody coming in and saying it's okay to do an inappropriate design, because I don't think it's ever going to happen that someone wants to come in and do an inappropriate design. I think they're going to want to maybe do a discrete addition. They might want to put in a discrete addition on the roof, setback. That's when your certificate of appropriateness standards comes in. That's where your federal standards come in about what's normal when you set back a rooftop addition from the elevation line so that it's not visible from the public way. There's a whole series of regulations that govern that type of thing. But it doesn't get as specific as what the critical features are in the staff report. So that's just a thought.
The criteria for approving a new addition are in the ordinance, and we should not touch them. We have no right to touch them today. I think all we can do is, I don't think we should seek to modify the ordinance, I don't even know that, I mean, I don't think the report is inaccurate as far as it goes. I think that it, to the extent it would help the owner to simply get, elaborate on the changes that would be, could be considered, the broader scope of changes than usual would be considered, and try to address some of these specific criteria the borrower thought somebody might want to look at. So when they look in, I think if we could achieve, I mean, that's the most we're going to achieve this week, and there's just no chance we're going to achieve
Right.
anything else.
So you're talking about removing those specific lists then that are in.
Well, I think to extent, I think it'd be, I mean, to the extent it would help the applicant to simply say that the types of, I mean, again, it's going back to that first, I don't know, could you go to the other page?
The other page? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. Broader interpretation, I don't know how you're working it, but something about that, specific types of modifications that could be considered would include, and then, subdivision of the northern lot for future development.
It's just the list of the things that we've talked about.
Well, a
tonight.
list of some of the things the applicant's requesting so that they could show a broker that, yeah, these are things the commission said that they would certainly be willing to look at.
Yeah. Can we come up with a list of those things so that way that language can be part of that?
Yeah, so it'd be subdivision of the lot.
Scott, did you have something you wanted to add?
Sure. Just specifically, since we were focusing now more on the report itself, and then the 5 points in the report that they're called for in the ordinance, the 1 through 5. Maybe if we could just specify which one we're looking at. If it's number 4, the proposed design guidelines, or 3, the criteria, and then maybe look at something. I could pull up that report if it'd be useful as well.
Well, this quoted sentence is out of 4, the proposed
Right.
design guidelines, so I think it goes there. And I do think it's just adding one sentence, and it's just listing these things as potential.
But I also think that we might just want to look at the listing of the elements in 3 and simplify. I mean,
Streamline that a little.
like modular size red brick, right? Do we have to list an aluminum and glass front entry door? I mean, I don't,
Strike that off.
Yeah, I would say we get rid of those and then add the additional sentence that we were talking about, and I think we're there, frankly.
Yeah, let's just dump the bulleted list.
Let's just get, and so we just end 3 with
The
With the
paragraphs.
the
photos.
paragraph and the
Yeah.
photos.
Photos.
And then for the other item, which is this is from 4, is that correct?
Yes. The broader interpretation is the first paragraph of 4.
Right. So essentially, we're talking about inserting a sentence after historic and cultural significance. Is that the
I
case?
think so.
And can someone propose the language for that sentence?
So how did you start off again, Mark?
Where would this be? I'm so
It
sorry.
would be on the
Page?
top of page 18,
Oh, I'm
which is
sorry.
where that
Okay.
where that paragraph comes from in the draft.
Okay.
I guess I would add one sentence that said something like, modifications necessary for adaptive reuse of the property shall not be discouraged. And then such modifications may include without limitation subdivision of the north parking lot for separate development. Modifications to the roof.
Modifications to the
replacement.
windows.
Yeah, modifications to the windows.
Just say yeah.
Yeah.
And
Can you use the word addition to the roof, or?
Yeah.
we can say additions to the roof
Additions,
or
yeah.
footprint.
That's all that I think is.
Any changes to the interior, even though we don't review that, apparently it's something to educate people we
Yeah.
can throw in.
Yeah, we may want to just add that just to reiterate it, though I think that if they're smart, they should be looking it up,
It should
but
be-
that's just me.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing? I think on page 16, though, can we take out, the commission will consider whether the work that is being proposed is compatible with the building as it has evolved up to 1979. I don't, can we just get rid of, it would not be expected to go back or rebuild it?
those last
Can we
two
take
things?
that out, and one may discount the appearance of the windows? Because and be more in keeping with the windows that were there in 1979 in the long run? That just sounds
No, that was
crazy.
actually something that I actually asked for that one to be stricken. I didn't think that was still in there, so.
In the long
If we could just put a
Carlos may
period
have
after
missed it,
evolved
unfortunately.
before up to 79, do you think we could do that? And then just take everything out?
That's what we're
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah,
So
that's
you're
what we're
gonna
take
talking
out up
about.
to 79 too?
Yeah.
Yeah, put
Yeah.
a period after 79.
Yeah, and then just
call it
take
a
out,
day.
right.
Yeah.
Put the period after evolved as compared to 79? Because it's above you're getting 1905 to 1979, but here it's being compatible with the building as it evolved. Oh, you want to leave it up to 1979? Yeah, that's okay. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
just
sorry.
leave it in there since
Okay.
we're referring to the period of significance.
Yeah, so then we'll take out the other two. But
Yeah.
I did like in the long run, it had a little, like, didn't know what it meant. but-
No. I didn't go back and re-rate it. I had asked for that one to be dinged, but. Okay.
So do you have the language you need now?
Scott, do you have the language or?
Yes, so we can get that language, and if there was a motion that would just include as revised.
As revised.
And I've got that struck
Okay,
in.
does someone want to make that motion?
Let's have Mark do it.
All right. I move that we approve the report recommending the landmark designation of 2010 Dewey with the modifications to the report that have just been agreed to by the commission.
And the resolution.
And the resolution for the city council.
I'm
And,
sorry.
and the resolution, if you look at the
Okay,
thing.
all right, and the resolution for the city council.
Yeah, to the city manager to transmit the commission's recommendation. That too,
Second.
right. Okay, second. Ken, second it. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Thank you.
Okay,
I really
thank you.
appreciate your willingness to
Thank you.
continue the discussion.
We're pleased that all of you worked together on
Yeah.
this.
Good. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Next item is 1505 Ashland. And then if you want to, hi there, if you want to sign in and introduce yourself, please.
There's no penny here.
Oh, there isn't? Okay. Here. And I'm going to ask that for that pen back because it's one of my favorites. Thank you.
So my name is Sebastian Gozio. I'm the owner, I'm the developer of 1505 Ashland. We are proposing a little bit of changes for a landmark single-family home. The previous meeting that we have, the plans were a little bit incomplete and it was lacking information. So we added all the information that it was requested in the previous meeting. How was this?
The right arrow should
Oh, there.
advance.
Yeah.
So again, we are not modifying anything in the front of the house, and then we are not modifying anything in the. There are two structures. There is one main structure, and there is a later addition. We don't know when that was built. That is a little bit lower. You can see this. This is the rear elevation of the house, the east elevation, and that's the addition that I'm saying. This has been built after we don't know when. The rear addition is significantly lower than the main house. and that's why we are proposing to raise the roof in this rear addition. You can see the main structure of the house. You can see the rear addition there. There is probably 5 feet difference between one and the other one. So that's the proposal, is to raise this roof, maintain the roof lines, maintain the character, maintain all the same look, but with a higher roof, which allows us to do a much better layout on the second floor. Well, that's the application. This is the existing site plan and the proposed site plan. They are both the same, except for the proposed site plan, we added a 2-car garage in the back that you can see here. This is the front elevation. Like I said, we are not modifying anything in the front. As per the recommendation of the commission, we are not replacing the windows in the main structure of the house. We're going to refurbish the windows. The windows right now, there are like wood windows, double hung wood windows with aluminum storm window on top. You can see it in the here in the north and south elevation. It's kind of hard to take pictures because the houses, they're kind of close to each other, so it's kind of hard to take pictures in there. And there's a lot of vegetation, especially now in the summer. But you can see the aluminum storm window on the windows, including the front. So this is north elevation. The only change that we are proposing here are these 2 windows, and then adding this window in here, and then I'm going to show you the floor plan. That's why we are these 2 windows. This window that is becoming these 2 windows is because we are putting the kitchen in there, and that existing window is too low for a regular height countertop in the kitchen. This is the south elevation. You can see the addition being higher. You can see we are modifying. This is a exterior. It was like a roof porch that at some point it has been enclosed, and then which is not original to the house. And then we are going back to wood siding and then double hung wood windows for that addition. The reason we are enclosing that is to put a half bathroom on the first floor and a mudroom. Everything else stays the same. The siding, you can see how this is the original siding that we're going to maintain. And then on the last part of the house, it has wood vertical siding, as well as the back facade. We are going back to the same siding matching the existing structure and the secondary structure. That's the rear elevation. Right now it has vertical wood siding. The windows are not even close to the original windows of the main structure, which is this one. The door is like a regular door with no panels, no nothing. And then we are proposing to add a deck in the back of the house. These windows that we are proposing in the new back facade, all the measurements are coming from existing windows from the main structure. So we are not introducing new sizes of windows or new style. They're all double hung and they're all wood windows. The windows in here, they're all beyond repair. This house has major lacking maintenance, so all this rear addition is in really bad shape, but there is not much to save in there anyway. These are the interior floor plans. Can I zoom in here? No.
For
easily.
Not easily.
I don't know how to do that. Basically, you are seeing this is the second floor. Second floor. This is the first floor. These are the two windows that I was saying on the north elevation that we are going from one window to two windows, and then also right now the height of the existing window that is in that place is probably like 20 inches from the floor, so it doesn't allow us to do a nice layout for the kitchen. And then all the windows are the same height. It's not like we can put the kitchen in a different location. Like all the windows on the first floor, they're like 20 inches from the floor. So it doesn't allow us to do any better layout, putting the kitchen someplace else. And then the only window that we are adding here is for the laundry room in there, on the second floor. That's
That's it?
pretty much it.
Okay. Questions from the commissioners? No questions? Julie?
So this is just a construct, like the way you've drawn it and how it's really going to be in reality on your north elevation, where your roof slopes down, you have window trim, but I don't think that's actually going to work that way architecturally. I think that wall has to be thicker and it's going to turn. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where I can't point to it. It's where
Yeah.
it's the window. Oh, okay. This right there, because this slope is coming down, and you have to turn the corner right there, and it looks like it's, I don't know, like 5 inches. Or I just don't think that is actually figured out. But I also have a question. Did you lower? So thank you. Did you lower this roof on the addition? Because why did you do that? I mean, I know it's narrower, but why did you not just continue the roof?
That was a recommendation from Carlos
Oh,
to
it's just
maintain the original structure divided from the newer addition.
because it's just gonna. I think it's just gonna create like a problem with your trim and everything else, because you get that it's like you've drawn it like miraculously it's all going to intersect, but. So I personally would not be opposed if you continued, other commissioners might, but if you continued that roof line across, I mean, it is narrower. But
Well,
then
if you look also on the floor plan, here, let me see. So the house juts in here. Mm-hmm. So to do a continuous roof in there we will have a different. A higher height on one side and a lower
right,
side
you
on the
change,
other.
yes, you have to change where the center is.
Correct.
The
Or it will look like uneven from the back. And that's the main reason also why we are leaving the roof a little bit lower. To have this roof like this.
And that all seems to work fine. It's just there's one window that's sort of colliding with that point of transition, I think. If you go back to the plant or that view, yeah.
This one?
Yeah, that window's kind of floating in space right where the roof transition happens.
It's at the very corner. We can move it a little bit in.
Yeah, I had the same question, because looking at the southwest view when you have it, because it's very obvious there, so. Any other questions on this one? Are we ready to entertain?
I have just one quick
go ahead.
question.
Yeah.
Sorry. The windows, you've called them out, the new windows are Marvin?
Yes.
And what, they're
Wood inside.
SDL or what? They're simulated?
True divided glass
It's true divided light. So they're going to be,
Wood inside and out.
right, so true divided, not SDL, so it's probably going to be a thicker, have you looked at that? It'll have a thicker mutton
It's
than the
called the
original.
historical line
Yeah, I know,
of the Marvin.
okay, so I would just ask you, you should look at it, and because we don't have a section of it, you should just look at the thickness of the muttons, because a true divided light window, as opposed to a Marvin SDL, it will have a thicker mutton, and it may look very different from the existing window, so I would tell you to actually look at it.
I went to Evans Lumber, and they can match exactly the windows that we have now.
Okay. Was
By the
there-
way, it's the top of the line of the Marvin
No,
line.
I'm just, there's different types.
Was there anyone in the audience who wanted to speak to this one? Okay, with that, are we ready to entertain a motion? Yeah, Ken?
I move we issue a certificate of appropriateness for the renovation project at 1505 Ashland Avenue, with the understanding that one window on the north elevation at the second floor will be shifted to avoid the conflict with the roof, as well as construction of a detached two-car garage, applicable standards for alteration 1 through 7, 9, and 10, and standards for construction 1 through 5, 7, 8, 10, and 12 through 15 apply.
Is there a second? Mark? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yep. Next is the public hearing for the landmark nomination for 1225 Asbury, and we need a motion to reopen the public hearing. Yeah.
I make a motion to reopen the public hearing on 1225 Asbury Avenue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Susie, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Hey again.
Welcome back. And
I'm
again,
Matt Fleming.
yes, again, if you can sign in and
We're doing that. I'm Matt Fleming, one of the owners, and this is Jolie Fleming, and we're signing in. Got it. Did you want us just to go through our proposal, or questions, or how do you want to do this?
basically what we'll have you do is go through your presentation first, and then we'll entertain any questions, and if there are any other comments, we'll hear those, and then we'll talk about it some more. So,
All right. So I'm Jolie Fleming. I'm one of the owners of 1225 Asbury, and we're nominating our home for landmark designation. So in advance of today, we submitted 3 separate documents, which I believe you guys all have. So the application itself, a supplemental document that is a detailed summary of the home, and then this PowerPoint presentation, which is a bit more of a narrative about the house. So all of those documents are a result of a series of research and conversations that we had with the Shipwright family, with our primary architect that's working with us on the house right now, Jeff Harding. We also met with Mary McWilliams to go through the process and had her review the presentation for tonight as well. And then we talked to several people that knew George personally. And so there's a detailed biography at the end of our presentation, as well as a bibliography, so you can see some of the people that we spoke with. So one thing that I would say is the detailed document that we had submitted was a bit more very specifically architectural. This, again, is a bit more of the narrative of who George is and the story of the home. So this first page is really just a reflection of the criteria that we think the home meets in terms of designation. So in section 294A, number 3 and number 4, we believe it meets both of those criteria for designation. So that specifically, the architect is of note, whose individual work is significant in the history or the development in the city of Evanston or the state of Illinois. And we also think that number 3 applies as well, in that it exemplifies an architectural type, style, or design distinguished by innovation or rarity or uniqueness. So what we wanted to go through with you tonight is the architect and the significance of his work, and then secondly, go through the home itself and the uniqueness and the innovation and the reflectiveness of the modernist style. So first, this is George. So this is the architectural eligibility, the architect eligibility. I believe some of you may have known George. George is known to be an apprentice himself. So he was a direct apprentice of Mies van der Rohe as well as Caldwell. And those are 2 people that, in talking with his family very specifically, he very much considered his mentors, and we'll see that throughout the buildings that he had architected. Secondly, he was an architect himself, and one that is considered quite accomplished and is representative of several iconic buildings in Chicago. And then lastly, he is a teacher and was a leader specifically at IIT. When you look at George's story, George was born in South Dakota. As a young man, he took interest in architecture, and it was said that he would scour the library as soon as he had gotten out of the military, and he would sit in the architectural library for hours and hours on end, fascinated with architecture. It's what he would say was where it was all happening at the time. And so what he decided to do in his early 20s was apply to IIT. He specifically had interest in Mies van der Rohe, and I think had interest in working under him and studying under him. So in the 50s, he spent 2 years at IIT. He never finished while he was there. He was asked by Caldwell and Mies van der Rohe to work as an apprentice in their shop. And he worked there for several years. While he was working there, he worked on many buildings. Obviously, he learned of a lot of his architectural focus there. But he was sent to New Jersey while he was working for them. And while he was working on a residential building, he was approached by another company who had received several proposals to work on Lake Point Tower. They were not happy with the proposals that were submitted, and so George was pretty much handed the opportunity to build Lake Point Towers. He then approached a friend of his from IIT, and together they became the architects for Lake Point Tower, which we all know is a pretty iconic building in Chicago. So in his 30s, he was off building this iconic site, which he considered the best site in the world and one of the biggest opportunities of his career. His partner in crime that was building it with him thought at the same time it was one of the biggest gambles that they could take because they thought that the site presented some challenges. So he was building Lake Point Tower, which I think, as we all know, was the tallest apartment building at the time. And he also took the licensing exam while he was building Lake Point Tower. When he finished Lake Point Tower, he decided to start his own architectural firm. And during that time, he was given the opportunity to build a couple of key buildings here in Evanston. So he worked on the State Bank and the Rotary Building. He also worked on several buildings in Chicago. And then he decided to buy the property at 1225. So while he was building in Evanston, he decided that this was where he wanted to call home. And so he bought the site and decided to build a single family residence there for himself. So that pretty much marks, and we can go through some of the specific buildings, but that marks his period of architecture. So he went from the apprentice to being the architect himself, and then in the 80s, he moved on to spend the rest of his career as a professor at IIT, and he was there as the chairman of the Department of Architecture, very similar to his mentor, through his death in 2013. So again, his primary inspiration was Mies van der Rohe and this idea of less is more. Caldwell, in talking with his family, Caldwell had an even bigger influence on him. So he was very much passionate about, bridging the spaces of indoors and outdoors and making them feel like one continuous space. He really believed in getting architecture back to its absolute purest form, and believed in spaces that were plain and unornamented, and really getting back down to skin and bones. So as you all know, there's various definitions of the modernist movement, which I'm sure we don't have to go through all of them, but Architectural Digest has them, the Chicago Architectural Foundation has them. Perhaps the most regarded is MoMA's definition of the modernist movement, which is the rejection of symmetry and the emphasis on architectural volume over mass, and the rejection of decoration and ornamentation. And so what you see consistently throughout all of Shipwright's work is that they are elegantly plain. Rectilinear and geometric forms are a hallmark of his style, consistently flat roofs, again, no applied ornamentation, the use of innovative technology at that time, glass and reinforced concrete, and of course, bridging the indoors and the outdoors. So this is Lake Point Tower, as we all know. That's George doing his studies. Apparently he was doing them most days with his partner on his dining room table. The interior spaces of Lake Point Towers are all meant to bridge the indoors and the outdoors and have, glass, steel, and concrete frames. And then I believe you guys all know that the parking lot of Lake Point Towers has a 2.5-acre park that sits on top of it, which is really one of his big commitments of, again, bridging indoors and outdoors, and Caldwell was who very specifically worked to design that space. In Evanston, he designed 1603 Orrington, so you can see some of those same elements in the space there. The Rotary Building, which again is really trying to use flat roofs, unapplied ornamentation, really get down to the basics and the bones of the structure. And then in Chicago, these are a few of his buildings as well: Atrium Village, Asbury Plaza. He also designed the Searle Building that was in Skokie. So George overall, as an architect, has won many awards. He is considered somebody who has designed buildings that have enduring significance and has been recognized by many leading organizations. So we think that as an architect, he is one of note, and there is eligibility based on him as a leading architect in Chicago. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is the home itself, which again is 1225 Asbury, and we believe it exemplifies the modernist style. This was George's primary residence that he was building for himself. It is the only single-family home that we are aware of that he has designed and architected. And he very specifically built this home for his personal use. So when you talk with his family about what guided a lot of the decisions, it certainly was his mentors and the modernist style, but it was also very much function over form for him. So those same qualities of elegantly plain, rectilinear structures, flat roofs, no applied ornamentation, glass and reinforced concrete, precast concrete floors and ceilings, and bridging of the indoors and outdoors, those same philosophies carry over into this home. So when you look at 1225 relative to where it sits in the neighborhood, you can see the surrounding homes in these photos. And 1225 definitely conforms to the standards of the surrounding homes with a pretty standard setback and space for landscaping, as well as the horizontality of the home relative to the surrounding homes. So while the surrounding homes are all from the 1800s, in many respects, he really did try and align the home with the surroundings. When you look at the exterior construction of 1225, you see the flat roofs, you see the asymmetry, you see the horizontality, you see all of these classic examples of the modernist movement. Certainly this space, as you can tell from the photo, is devoid of any applied ornamentation and molding. It really is truly a sculptural structure unto itself. And it has a lot of feeling of regularity and rhythm, and again, horizontality and balance. So that's the front-facing facade. When you look at the rear of the home, so there's an extreme sensitivity to light and space. So the entire back of the home has floor-to-ceiling sliding doors and horizontal banded second-floor windows. There are 5 exterior horizontal balconies in total and a full rooftop deck for the house, which is his absolute attempt to bridge the indoors and the outdoors. So these are some historical photos of the house. As we talked through it with our architect that we're working with right now, his commentary was, the house is in superb condition from the exterior. It is virtually identical to the original construction and the design. So you can see from 1980 what the home looked like in the front and in the rear. And on the right, you can see where we are today. Here you can see we've tried to collect photos of the home over time. And we don't know the exact dates of each of the photos, except for the one on the right, which is modern day. But all of the others, you can see that the structure itself on the exterior has remained nearly identical throughout the time. So the one piece that is not consistent, if you look back at this photo, is you can see in the one on the far right, which is today, you'll see this kind of random arch coming off of the side of the house, which is very much uncharacteristic of him. Every single angle in the home is a right angle. So to see this arched greenhouse off of the house, that clearly is atypical of the form itself. So that, we believe, is not original to the building based on what we've seen. And our architect believes it's a pretty egregious thing to have that on the house. So we are going through some current restoration right now. Actually, if you drive by the house today, you will no longer see that on the home, as we have just removed that from the house. So it is helpful, I think, to also, while the landmark designation and the criteria is based on the exterior of the home, we do think that it's interesting to also take a moment to look at the interior as well, because the interior fabric of the home has really maintained, been virtually unchanged as well. So the interior construction is also asymmetrical with the same rejection of ornamentation. Again, it is absolute function over form. The rooms are dominated all by natural light. They are all right angles, and it's definitely on a gridded structure. So these two photos give you a bit of a glimpse of, what it looks like from, so on the left is from the front of the house, and interestingly, the circle that sits on the front of the house is nearly identical to what you see in Lake Point Towers with that same circle. And then the one on the right is to see how the light floods in. All throughout the house, and let's see. So all throughout the house, you can see that there's varied height. So this is where a lot of the asymmetry comes into play. Each of these spaces, so here and here, as well as here, you'll see there's spaces in the house that are all intended to maximize light in the home. So while the front of the house looks like a very concrete structure, the entire home as you walk into it is flooded with light that has been tried to be optimized from every angle. You can see more of that in these photos. Regardless of the room or the space that you're in, it is all designed to maximize and bridge the indoors and the outdoors. Just as for reference, these are the floor plans of the house. They're not the official architectural floor plans, but they are what was used in a recent sale. So similar to some of the recognition that George received for his work, he received awards on this house as well. So it has been recognized by Design Evanston. This was taken from one of the brochures from 2015. And I think the jury's comment here very much reflects kind of true to form the house, which is that the project excels in its spatial exploration and its incorporation of the landscape into the volumes of the house. It uses innovative construction technology. It uses passive energy strategies, and it's a forward-thinking project that continues to be relevant over 4 decades later. So I really think that they did a nice job at summarizing the house. In addition, they featured the house in the 150 Years of Evanston, 150 Places of Evanston. So switching gears to the integrity of the landmark. So we believe that it meets all of the criteria. It has the integrity of the location in that it remains in the exact original location. The integrity of design, it's superbly intact. The setting itself is virtually unchanged, and the integrity of the materials are as well, with the construction of concrete, glass, and steel all fully intact. And the workmanship is, beyond detailed. So there's extreme attention to every single detail in the home. So we think that the house is an exceptional candidate for landmark designation based on the 2 criteria. We won't go through it tonight, but there is also some interesting local lore around the house and stories that have emerged around the architect himself and what happened and did he ultimately live in the house. And so we did manage to get some really interesting information from his family. So we just put it in as supplemental because we think it's interesting to have that on record and dispel some of the myths that are out there. That's all.
Thank you very much. Questions from the commission? Observations? Thoughts? Well, we're very excited that you nominated this house and brought the nomination back to us. So, Julie, you look like you have a question.
No, not a question, but I think I agree with Diane. I'm glad you brought it back and that you have all this information. I think you did a really great job at presenting it.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
It's fun to research your own house, right?
With that, any questions, final questions, comments? Do we want to entertain a motion to nominate 1225, I was going to get there. To nominate 1225 Asbury for landmark designation and direct staff to prepare the report and the resolution asking the city manager to transmit the commission's recommendation. You can just read it from 2010 Dewey. Okay.
I'll do it.
All right, go for it, Susie.
I move to nominate 1225 Asbury Avenue for nomination of landmark designation and to direct staff to prepare the report and resolution asking the city manager to transmit the commission's recommendation. Is that good?
Yeah, that works. Is there a second?
Second.
Ken, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, yes, thank you. I had that in my notes, too. If we can have a motion to close the public hearing on 1225 Asbury.
I make a motion to close the public hearing on 1225 Asbury.
Is there a second? Mark, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next is 2305 Brown Avenue. The applicant has withdrawn that application. We do need a motion to close the public hearing for that one.
I move that we
Withdrawal.
close the public hearing for 2305 Brown Avenue.
Is there a second? Julie, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Moving on to new business. The first item is 834 Madison Street, and I assume that's what your folks are here for. So if you can step up and if you're going to speak, sign in, please, and introduce yourself, and you can begin your presentation. Oh, okay, thank you.
My name's Jim McNamara. I'm one of the installation managers at Renewal by Anderson Windows. Timothy Daisy, who's the owner at 834 Madison Street, was unable to attend tonight, and I am representing him and his job. We've been here before. One of the things I did want to point out, Patrick Terry, who was our sales representative who had sold the job to Timothy, unfortunately was not able to make it either, but Steve came in place. I did want to point out that the existing pictures and the proposed replacements that Timothy had given to Carlos, there were some visible glass measurements that he put on that I noticed that are actually wrong, and I just wanted to point out that the existing house that we're replacing the windows on, our visible glass, you would actually lose about 7/8 of an inch on each side in width, and then total height, there's about 1.25 inches of visible glass that's lost when compared to the existing windows that would be pulled versus our window that goes in. They're an insert application, but I think it should be noted that the existing home has storm windows that would be removed, and the storm windows take up a considerable amount of coverage of the existing windows. So once those come off, I think that the look of the home versus what's now, you'd actually be gaining a visibility of a clear view that would be increased with those being removed. The color of the windows being chosen is black on the exterior, which contrasts a little bit different from what the color of the windows right now. They're kind of a reddish color. The west side section, which I believe that faces Elmwood Street, shows second story and first story units being changed out that are a part of like a bump out of the unit. I'm sorry?
You can use the,
Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
see that this was, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
yeah, that's all right.
Let me get to this. I'm a little new with this here. So this is the front of the house, but I wanted to get to, so this is the west side, which shows the bump out on the second floor and the first floor, and then the second floor window just to the left. These were the existing visible glass sizes that he has. So if I go to, you'll notice on the B designation window, I'll just use as an example because this is pretty much consistent throughout the project with what the homeowner had submitted to Carlos. The 35.5 by 36 visible glass, you actually end up with our window and visible glass, it ends up being 33 7/8. So, and he puts 35 1/8. Why, I don't know, but I'm just wanting to point out that our replacement window, since it's being done as an insert, it is fitting in the original mainframe of the windows that are there. But the stiles and rails is pretty much consistent. We have a 2-inch check rail that goes across. The stiles on the side of the sashes, those are also 1 3/4, so the look does stay somewhat consistent with what's being removed. The second floor, which I want to kind of get to the pictures here. I'm going to go back and forth on this. So that side, and then the shows the rear of the house where those units are being changed. The existing one-bys, which the customer would just be repainting themselves. So our window, there isn't any coil or capping that's being put on. We use our Fibrex material as we have little L-shaped caps that connect the window to the existing painted outer frame of the building, so none of the stucco or those 1x4s, I believe is what they are, would stay on there. It would just be the storm windows that would be coming off. And I think this shows the interior, so you can see some of the storm windows as they go much further in past the visible glass of the house. There's considerable dry rot on these check rails and in the sash frames of the windows. And I didn't have any information from the homeowner, but, I mean, he felt that the condition of these windows kind of pointed him in the direction of having the windows replaced instead of try to have it restored. They're pretty dry rotted. That's all we got.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions?
Well, we've, and I guess that's part of, this is just an example.
Yeah, if you could maybe set it up there or there so that folks can see it a little bit better.
The screen can come out. Our dimensions, as I said before.
Yeah, if one of you could speak into the microphone and just describe it. Thank you.
So the stiles and the rails, the Fibrex is a composite. It's a part wood, part vinyl polymer composite that the window's been made out of. So it still has all the features of a typical double hung. The check rail is very traditional. It's squared off. This job does not have any grills per se being used, even though the sample shows that. But our dimensions that we do at Anderson, we try to mimic exactly what typical double hung dimensions are on sash size frames and the bottom sill plates. And it's mortise and tenon corners, so you don't have that vinyl welded look that you typically would see on some replacement windows. And the glass is a dual pane insulated glass package, and the screens would be full screens that come with the window itself. Any questions on the product? I mean, I guess my assumption is, since I've been, it's been probably a couple of years since I've been here, and we've presented our windows before, and they have been approved by the commission in projects. So I don't know of any other questions that you'd have concerning our window.
Can I just ask, like, I don't know about this material, so how new is this window for you?
The renewal, the Fibrex window for renewal has been around for 23 years.
And I'm just going to ask this question. Have you ever been before a commission with this Fibrex
Yes.
material?
Yes, we have.
On a landmark home? On a landmark home?
Yes, I believe we have.
Not, well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Here in Evanston?
In Evanston.
Okay. I guess the question that I have really gets to and if you could maybe explain this, I may not be interested in, maybe Julie or Ken or Jamie or Susie can. My concern is the issue that you brought up initially, which is the difference between the pane sizes, because that seems like a fairly substantial difference in terms of appearance. And it may be me that I'm not understanding why, even if it's 33 and change, and the drawings show 35 and change, what's going to mitigate that?
Well,
in terms of the window design and how it's installed.
Well, I think what we're looking at is the existing look of the home right now. You've got storm windows on every one of these windows, which covers the original window that was there from before. So there is.
Are all of those windows original in the home?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did the owner, I didn't see this, but did they get a number for the restoration of these windows? Because I didn't see anything in the packet.
No,
don't?
there was none that I could see from here, and he was going off of the actual condition in the photographs that he had sent in initially.
I think there was a letter that we saw that said they had trouble getting a number or something.
Yeah,
Did you
I
see
think it was
that?
in the email.
In the email.
That was part of the packet, that they didn't get anybody to give them a number on it.
I don't know. I just have a concern with the material of the window. I know that the Preservation Commission probably has come a long way since absolutely saying, no, you must, it actually, to refurbish and restore is kind of what we've, been, I think it's even in the language that is first and foremost. So not to see any information on any of that is, kind of unfortunate from the owner. But so I know we've accepted wood SDL windows and in some cases clad, but I just have never, I guess I'm just uncomfortable with the material of this window, so.
Okay, is it the look of it, or just the fact that you're hearing the term composite?
Well, it's like a wood fiber with
Yeah, the fiber.
with a vinyl. So, I guess my question is this is a question for the commission, where do we draw the line? Like, what if, because we've been down this path where when there's, and I know it's not a vinyl window, but, we are accepting all types of windows except vinyl, or how does that all play out in Landmark?
I think to me, the question is, even within your line of windows, is there a particular reason why this was selected over something like a wood window that was either a wood window or a wood steel clad or some other option? And I guess I'd like to know what the process was for that.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the homeowner since he's not here, but he asked us to come out. Our sales rep had shown our product to them. He liked the product. He liked the fact that it's a non-rottable material. It still has the look and design of a real wood window, with how the joinery of the stiles and rails of the construction of the window is, and the fact that it's a top brand. I mean, Andersen makes great products, and and there's no peeling or fading with it. You don't have the bulkiness of a typical vinyl window. I mean, vinyl gets a pretty bad rap because there's so many different extrusion designs out there, and they've historically been a larger, bigger, bulky type of design that you have massive amounts of glass loss, where here you really don't. You do, simply because this is being used as an insert application, and he's not tearing out the rough opening of the window.
So you'll get an extra amount of, that's why the glass is smaller, because it's a replacement window. Because
Correct.
basically it's just going in the opening.
Yeah, you're taking, what's the process of this job would be taking out all the storm window framings, the sashes there, and then you're taking out the sashes and the spline and the rope and weights of the original, and then that weight pockets are being re-insulated prior to the new window being put in.
Is this particular type of window cheaper than the other windows?
No, this is probably, this right here is the Cadillac of Andersen. This is our top end product line.
Can I just ask a quick question? Did I hear you right that you said that the new windows were going to be black instead of the red?
That's correct. That's what the homeowner had chosen.
That's the sample I brought was the black that they chose.
And is it accurate? Are you doing all the windows on the entire house, including that front sun? It looks like there's a sunroom.
The windows that are being changed are, again, our
So it is just selected windows. It's not going to be all of them. So there will be still some red windows and then some of the new black windows.
I believe there is some that he was going to plan on painting to match up.
And then all the shutters are black or something? Is that what's going to, is all the trim black?
Shutters,
then?
I don't have any information to give you concerning that. That would probably be a question for the homeowner.
On your sample, most of it is kind of brown, except for a part of the
Could you
frame
put-
that the.
This is actually a different color than this. That's why I brought the sample so you can see the black. This is actually dark bronze. Sorry, I'm gonna just make one quick.
Yeah, mostly that's dark bronze, but would this part of the frame under the upper sash that's kind of putty gray, would that be black as well, or would it be this kind of two-tone appearance?
Black. I think it's stone.
The jam liners would be is a stone color, so it's a darker.
I'll grab the screen so I didn't just.
It's going.
It won't go anywhere.
You see what I'm asking? It's like, would we see a consistent color from the outside, or would you see a contrast at that part of the frame in this?
That's what it's
with this
like
line?
from the outside.
Right.
But when you're talking about right here.
Exactly. Does that have to be that color?
That will be the same color for black.
That would be black to match the rest of the outside.
The Fibrix itself has the same R value as the original wood windows, and because it is comprised of wood fibers, it doesn't expand and contract like the vinyls. So that's, to your point, you asked why this particular window we went with. I'm sorry. Sorry.
That's all right.
No
But,
problem.
Any other questions? Are there concerns that folks haven't expressed on this?
So I think
yeah.
I think we've done like new construction projects where we've been okay with the consistent look. It's obviously not a landmark building. I am not comfortable using this type of product on a landmark home. Just would be my opinion.
Well, I agree with that.
It's kind of a sequence of logic where it's almost like the goalposts keep getting moved. So it starts out like, okay, the goal would be restore the existing windows. Oh, well, they're not restorable, so we'll let people replace them. And it's like, well, we want to replace them, but we don't want to match the original material of wood. We think the wood would rot out too fast. Okay, so we're going to use aluminum clad on the outside of the wood to make the wood last longer. And then it's like, okay, well, now we've moved the goalposts again. It's like we're replacing it with a completely different material of a different profile, a different sight line, a different size window opening. We've lost the thread of preservation completely at this point almost.
I don't think you're changing the profile at all.
But it's shrinking the vision area though.
because of the application, not the window design.
That would go for the aluminum clad. That would go for all those other types
As
of
a
windows.
the choice of a replacement window.
Of an insert.
Insert.
An insert, the application is there. So if you're,
Yeah.
if this homeowner was to go to a full gut out, now you're increasing the glass because the frame is, that's where the glass loss is. I mean, the typical, that weight pocket frame as you're removing it, those wood jambs, they're just under 3/4 of an inch in thickness. And
Right. So do we want to see this again? How do we want to proceed on this one?
Do you think the homeowner would be willing to consider or at least look at what the cost would be to do the gut out that at least maintains the sight lines? I mean, that's really a kind of stupid point.
that could be entertained with them, I would think. Unfortunately, I'm on the back half of the business, so I haven't even met the gentleman. I don't want to sound so impersonal here.
We understand that, but I think that what Ken is suggesting, and perhaps at the same time, maybe looking at other options there that, we're a little bit more comfortable with and have approved on Landmark Homes in the past, I think would be helpful. So what we'd like to do in that circumstance to give you folks, and, especially since your sales rep isn't here as well either,
Sure.
is to have the opportunity to talk with the homeowners about those various options. And what we can do is have you come back next month.
Okay,
So,
fair enough.
Can I ask
Go
something
ahead,
as well?
Julie.
Thanks. Also, it would be really helpful if if the windows were drawn, if a window section was drawn accurately to compare the two, so we could understand, because this is pretty diagrammatic.
Yes.
So for instance, I'm just wondering, on the front of the house, some of them are being replaced, but some aren't.
Right.
Right? So I don't know in the end what they're really going to look like, because this is so diagrammatic. So maybe a section like I think typically when we look at windows, we're actually looking at true elevation of the existing window compared to the new window, and then a section through it. That is actually
Would
in the
you,
documentation.
and I think related to that, I'd like to know what's being replaced, confirm what's being replaced and what isn't, too.
would you be privy to a side-by-side cross-sectionals as well? Like the existing?
That's exactly right.
That's exactly it.
So there's already sort of in the system that Carlos has, there's, this
Yeah.
window package that we like to, so that helps us, since it's hard to know. And since you're not replacing all the windows.
Okay.
Can we maybe give some guidance on the color? I mean, I take a little bit of to have half black windows and then half red windows.
Oh, I assume that they're going to be, we should know, I agree.
Yeah.
We should
That's
know
a
that they're
question
all
we
going to
should
be the
know.
same.
If you-
Yes.
Yeah, it was stated at the time of sale that they would be painting once the windows were installed.
Okay.
And what about but then they have storms. So here's a question. With the ones that aren't changed and there's storms, so they're going to paint this. So I think we want
Just some
specifics,
clarification on
Okay.
what's happening with the windows that we're not looking at as part
Right.
of this project.
And we did have an address here locally for you, 1013 Judson.
Okay.
So
With that, can we have a motion to continue this one until it's October 9th, if I recall, to the October 9th, 2018 meeting?
I move to continue 834 Madison Street to the October 9th meeting.
Is there a second?
I second.
Julie, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Have a good evening. The next item on the agenda was the approval of the minutes from July 10th, 2018. I talked with Scott earlier today, and I think that those minutes, the draft minutes, need to be reduced in size and made more of meeting minutes. Carlos, I think, was under some pressure since he was leaving town. So what I'm going to do in his absence, as I told Scott, is take a crack at writing the minutes, and we'll take a look at it next month. So just to let you know, since I know everybody received a copy of that. Scott, I don't know if you had any staff reports or updates at all?
No, we do not.
All right. Well, with that, we have nothing to discuss. With that, can we have an emotion to adjourn?
Oh, wait, I have one thing.
Oh, okay.
I just think, I sent, for the guidelines.
Yes.
I'm confused a little bit about, and he's not here, but about what he needed, because I really sent the stuff back that I had sent earlier.
Right.
And I think the best thing for Carlos is just to get started so that we can look at what's happening and
Sure.
then make corrections, as opposed to, I don't understand the documentation that he wants, okay?
I'm not sure I can
And I've
speak to that.
forgotten like
so-
half of it. It's a year ago. So,
Yeah.
so this is for Carlos. I can tell him, but I'm just making. 'cause
No, and I appreciate
Yeah.
that. What I would suggest is once he gets back and gets dug out, we
yeah.
can get that rolling again. So we finish that up, since all of our other related work is now
finished,
done. Yeah. With that, can we have a motion to adjourn the meeting tonight?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second, Mark. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, thanks, everybody.